Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to the Attic. It's time for another voicemail. Today's voicemail is from Danny. Let's listen to what Danny has to say.
Hello, Lloyd. My name is Danny. Feel free to use this on your channel. I had an interesting conversation recently that I was wondering what your thoughts were, and I'll make it as brief as possible. But basically, I was speaking with someone regarding, the effects of the cult, of JWs, and cognitive dissonance, and all the things that you have mentioned on your channel many times, and even some of the professionals that you've interviewed before. And a friend of mine asked me a very interesting question. I was just kind of letting her know about my past and my history. I'm no longer in the organization, and luckily don't have to really deal with it on a day-to-day basis. But I was just mentioning to her how it works, and the hierarchy and so on and so forth. And she asked me a question. She said, well, if the governing body are the ones who tell everyone what to do, and they presumably, I don't know if they all are, maybe you can answer this question, presumably they were all born into the organization or joined at a very young age, I would assume, to get to the status of governing body member. If that's the case, then they technically would be victims of indoctrination as well. And so those that we are now holding accountable, when we say the governing body are liars and manipulators and con artists, and they know the truth and they know what they're doing, if they were born in or came in at a very young age and they've had years and years of this cult indoctrination drilled into their heads, they have, I guess, the justification or the excuse that your average rank and file Jehovah's Witness has of being manipulated and being lied to and actually believing what they're saying on things like JW broadcasting and on the when they're giving talks at assemblies and whatnot. So she basically asked me, how do you draw the line between accountability and responsibility? Because they could say that they were born in and they haven't known anything else, and we probably all would agree that they are the ones who we would hold responsible or accountable for the things that are going on in the organization right now. So yeah, I thought it was an interesting question. I was pretty, I'd never thought of it from that perspective, and I was just wondering what your opinions on it were. Anyway, Lloyd, always appreciate your work and your channel, and best of luck to you, and hope to hear from you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Danny. You will hear from me soon. You'll hear from me right now because I really appreciate this voicemail. It is an interesting question. I'm sure your friend is well-meaning, but I would disagree. Well, I don't disagree with the question. You can't agree or disagree with the question. A question's a question. But I think that there's a little bit of naivety behind the question, a little bit of, frankly, lack of knowledge of what it means to be a governing body member and what you have to see and get comfortable with in order to rise to that level of the organization's hierarchy. To become a governing body member, you need to not just see the skeletons in the closet, you need to get waist deep in putting the skeletons in the closet yourself. You need to do the dirty work, quite a lot of dirty work. Currently, everybody on the governing body, there are currently 9 members, has spent at least some time in the service department, with the exception, I think, of Geoffrey Winder, who's one of the recently appointed governing body members. All of the other members of the governing body have had some involvement in the service department, and it's the service department that really does the organization's dirty work. That is like, I don't know, the attack dog of the organization. It's the service department that knows where all the bodies are buried in terms of the cover-up of abuse. They're the ones pulling the strings when it comes to keeping the identities of known sexual predators beyond the reach of law enforcement. So whereas your regular rank and file don't know anything about, I mean, most of them won't even know what the service department is. But those that do know what the service department is, perhaps they keep tabs on jw.org and on the various organizational accomplishments, propaganda videos that go out. Those that do know what the service department is will have a very rose-tinted impression of what they do. They'll think, oh, the service department, it just shepherds the congregations. It makes sure that all of the congregations have the tools they need for doing the kingdom preaching work. No. What they do is they make sure that each and every congregation is being run according to the organization's predetermined policies, including the policies that say we deal with child sexual abuse. We deal with it first and foremost, and we will be the gatekeepers. We will decide whether law enforcement gets involved. That's what the service department has been doing now for decades. So for you to make it to, again, governing body member level, you need to know about all of that. You perhaps need to have been involved with actual cases where abuse has been covered up, so that you're effectively an accomplice in the cover-up of crime. I think it's safe to say that the vast majority of rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses who attend Kingdom Halls have never knowingly covered up crimes. The same cannot be said of the governing body. And that's why I repeatedly say that ideally what we need to see at some point is the governing body members in jail. You know, I'm unapologetic about that standpoint. Governing body members need to be in jail, and governing body helpers who work or have worked on the service department also need to be in jail. For everybody else, you could make some kind of argument that they were just following along and didn't know the true extent of how evil the organization is. For practically everybody else, and I'm including governing body helpers who've never worked on the service department, I'm including people like Geoffrey Winder, although the longer Geoffrey Winder serves as a governing body member, the more he's going to see what truly goes on. I don't think any excuses can be made, quite frankly, for knowingly putting children in danger. And that doesn't describe the vast majority of rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses for whom cognitive dissonance is a real thing and something that means that they're not fully in control of what they're doing. They are beholden to this spell, this indoctrination, which, as you say, has been instilled in them more or less from birth, so that they don't have a grasp on reality, you know? They just go along with what they're told. And I agree that the governing body members themselves, to a large extent, you know, have been indoctrinated from birth. I think Kenneth Cook joined the organization out of high school, something like that. Even so, we're talking, you know, a young, naive person who may have had some kind of trauma in his life, who knows, and who was duped into joining the organization before he knew the true extent of the horrors that go on. And by the time he did know the full extent, he had bought into the organization, he was personally invested in it, and it had to be the truth, and he had to go along with it. Who knows? The point is, I'm one of the first people in line when it comes to the painful admission that the governing body are mostly deluded. They are mostly acting on indoctrination and manipulation. That's how strong cult mind control is. It's so easy, isn't it, to just say they must be cynical. They must be knowingly running some kind of scam, some kind of racket. They're just doing this for the money. It's so easy to say that. But having spent years now watching these men give talks, before I could watch their talks, I was listening to talk recordings. I've listened to so much of their material, and I have yet to come across anything that makes me think they're purely cynical, that they're purely doing this to improve their own station in life, and they don't believe what they're saying one little bit. I think the situation is nuanced. I think there will always be an element of the ends justifies the means thinking, where they're able to make excuses and they're able to say, you know what, this may be a bit shifty, but we're the ones in charge. We've been put in charge of God's organization and we'll make that call. I think there will always be an element of that, but mostly when they're reading from the Bible and when they're telling people this is what Jehovah wants us to do, I think for the most part, they themselves believe it. And that poses so many disturbing permutations. We need to kind of grasp this, because it's important not to underestimate how powerful cult indoctrination is. Even the leaders themselves can buy into it. I think it was Ray Franz who wrote that, because he was routinely asked this question, do the governing body members know what they're doing? And I think he described them in one of his books, either Crisis of Conscience or In Search of Christian Freedom. I think he described them as followers of followers or something like that. They are perpetuating something that they inherited. And at the time they inherited this mantle of power in the organization, they were believers themselves. But that doesn't get them out of jail, especially when we're talking about the cover-up of criminal abuse. There cannot be an excuse for that. I'm sorry. I think in my own example of how I spent a year as an elder, unfortunately, in my year as an elder, I never came up against any cases of abuse. In fact, I didn't even attend, I wasn't even asked to sit on any judicial committees, thankfully. But in my year as an elder, even though it was a short period, it did at least help me to see how twisted and man-made the organization is, because I lost any illusion that elders are spirit appointed when I spent that year attending elders meetings and seeing elders trying to manipulate other elders and seeing power plays in action and people trying to get one up on their fellow elders. I saw all of that. I saw elders bullying members of the congregation over really trivial things. And so just that year where I was an elder was, I think, instrumental in my eventual exit from the organization, because although there were many factors involved in me finally breaking free, from my own personal experience, whenever I thought about kind of getting higher up in the organization and what it was like to experience being an elder, I didn't have any thoughts of, oh yes, but this really is God's organization, because I've seen it for myself. Every time I thought about my experiences higher up in the organization, including just such simple things as working on the chairman's office at the convention and things like that, every single thing I thought about going to MTS, being appointed as an elder, in each and every instance, I saw politics. I saw, the mundanity of people trying to get one up over the other and holding privilege and position as important. And so if that was my experience as someone who only spent 1 year as an elder, again, goodness knows what governing body members get to see. Governing body helpers, governing body members, anyone who spends any amount of time, frankly, working in Bethel, they get to see some stuff. And I think the more informed you are, the more you see of what's going on behind the curtain, the more culpable you become. If you're just a rank and file congregation member who doesn't really get to see too much, then, can you really be blamed for just assuming that it's God's organization and for just going along with it? The more you see and the more you get your hands dirty, in my view, the more culpable you become. So I hope that answers your question. And thank you so much for calling in with it. If you would like to call in and leave a voicemail, the thing to do is go to speakpipe.com/Cedars, remembering to indicate clearly if you don't want me to play your message on this channel. But that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching.